Chapter 91. For the past few days, Jingyu had been doing the same things as before. The only difference was that Jingyu had suddenly become exceptionally diligent in class. This gave Shangguan Linglan a fright, and he even suspected that Jingyu had been provoked. Jingyu, have you been provoked recently? In the afternoon, Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan would normally be leisurely sitting at the side drinking tea and eating snacks. However, today, only Shangguan Linglan was sitting while Jingyu and Ning Xiangyuan were seriously practicing their walking. This gave Shangguan Linglan a fright. After holding it in for a long time, he finally couldn't hold it in any longer and walked up to Jingyu and asked, "Me? No, I'm fine." Jingyu blinked her eyes in confusion and said, "No matter how I look at you, you don't look fine." Shangguan Linglan walked around Jingyu and said, "Hurry up and tell me the truth. Why have you been studying so hard recently? What provoked you? Could it be that the Ninth Emperors disliked you?" Shangguan Linglan looked at Jingyu in horror and said. When Jingyu heard this, she stumbled and almost fell. She looked at Shangguan Linglan speechlessly and said, "Which eye of yours saw me being disliked? I remember that there was a precedent for someone being thrown out of the carriage by the Ninth Emperors." Shangguan Linglan looked as if he had guessed correctly. Jingyu gritted her teeth. Whenever this matter was brought up, she would feel anger, even though it had happened a long time ago. "Hurry up and tell me. Did the Ninth Emperors dislike you? That's why you're working hard to learn etiquette and win the favor of the Ninth Emperors and capture his heart." Shangguan Linglan leaned closer to Jingyu and said. Jingyu's eyes suddenly widened, and she gritted her teeth for a long time without saying a word. What a joke. She needed to win the favor of that man? Please, how could that be possible? You're so annoying, lower your voice. Jingyu pulled Shangguan Linglan and said shyly. Her feminine appearance almost made Jingyu vomit from disgust. Really? Shangguan Linglan was almost frightened by Jingyu's sudden change. He looked at Jingyu in horror and asked, "What did the Ninth Emperor say about you? Why did he provoke you so much?" "He said that I'm like a savage who doesn't have any manners and doesn't have any feminine charm. He said that I'm annoying and that he doesn't want to see me anymore." Jingyu lowered her head and looked like she was about to cry. She was roaring in her heart. "He said that I'm as beautiful as a flower and that I'm too cute and that he can't bear to part with me. Ha 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 ha. What? The Ninth Emperors actually said that about you? It's simply..." Shangguan Linglan was instantly enraged when he heard this. He rolled up his sleeves and said, "Let's go and find him to reason things out. You're so beautiful and have a straightforward personality. How could he belittle you like that? Ah, you're flattering me." Jingyu's heart was filled with joy. If she had a tail behind her at this moment, it would definitely be wagging happily at this moment. No wonder you're studying so hard. No matter what, you have to make the Ninth Emperor see you in a different light. Shangguan Linglan patted Jingyu's shoulder and said, "Jingyu, I support you. From today onwards, I'll also study hard with you." Jingyu was slightly stunned. She hadn't recovered from the sudden turn of events. Then, she saw Shangguan Linglan pulling Ning Xiangyuan aside as if he was going to a battlefield and discussing the right training methods to maximize the efficiency of her learning. Chapter 92. Jingyu looked at Shangguan Linglan's analysis, and her heart was filled with admiration. He was indeed a descendant of a military family. Look at each and every sentence. It was the quintessence of the quintessence. This analysis made Jingyu start to doubt. Was learning etiquette really that difficult? Several days passed, and Jingyu hadn't seen Xiao Chun for a long time. Occasionally, when she woke up in the morning, she would find a faint warmth beside her, proving that Xiao Chun had come back to sleep. Jingyu was already used to this and didn't even bother to ask. Today, classes ended early. Shangguan Linglan made a fuss about wanting to see Jingyu's two wolves. Ning Xiangyuan said that she was very curious about the prince's residence and wanted to see it for herself. Jingyu naturally didn't refuse and warmly invited the two of them into her residence. When they alighted from the carriage, Jingyu arrogantly said to the guards standing at the entrance of the prince's residence, "Look carefully. In the future, when these two ladies visit, you are not allowed to stop them. Do you understand?" The group of guards looked at each other and finally said in unison, "Understood." When Jingyu heard this, she nodded in satisfaction and led Shangguan Linglan and Ning Xiangyuan into the prince's residence. Wow, how is this a prince's residence? It's more like a palace. It's so beautiful. Ning Xiangyuan looked at Jingyu enviously and said, Yeah, it must be very comfortable for you to live here. It's so big. You can go wherever you want. It's too big. I still don't know the way. Jingyu's face was slightly embarrassed. She had lived in this prince's residence for so long, but she could only remember 3 paths. The one to return to the lotus garden, the one to the study, and the last one to the kitchen. In order to solve her hunger problem as quickly as possible, Jingyu had already figured out the location of the kitchen on the day she entered the prince's residence. She thought that she could grab something to eat in the middle of the night. This is my courtyard, Jingyu said as she led Shangguan Linglan and Ning Xiangyuan into the lotus garden. What a beautiful lotus pond. It's like a fairyland. Ning Xiangyuan blinked her eyes and looked at the lotus pond. Her eyes were shining. There's a boat over there. Do you want to take a ride? Jingyu asked with a smile. Sure. Everyone happily played around in the lotus pond. After that, Shangguan Linglan wanted to take a look at Jingyu's 2 gray wolves. However, Ning Xiangyuan didn't want to see them no matter what. It was probably because she had been frightened by the Princess Royal's residence last time. Jingyu naturally wanted to force her to take a look. She ordered Yin Xiao to take Ning Xiangyuan to walk around the prince's residence. Yin Xiao had only accompanied her for half a day when she was called away by a servant. She said that there was a problem with the imperial concubine's food that was prepared in the kitchen. Yin Xiao told Ning Xiangyuan to wait in place and that she would be back soon. Ning Xiangyuan nodded in agreement. She stood in place and waited for a while. Then she wanted to walk around and come back later. The flowers in this garden were exceptionally beautiful. It made Ning Xiangyuan want to play around. She took small steps and jumped on the stone steps. Ning Xiangyuan was about to jump forward when she suddenly saw a pair of man's shoes in front of her. She instantly jumped in fright and quickly steadied herself. She raised her eyes and looked over. After this glance, Ning Xiangyuan was stunned in place. She couldn't look away. Who are you? Xiao Qin's brows furrowed tightly. He looked at Ning Xiangyuan with a scrutinizing gaze. He didn't remember when there was another woman in his residence. Chapter 93. Ning Xiangyuan's face suddenly turned red when she heard Xiao Qin's question. Her eyes were filled with amazement. Looking at Xiao Qin's handsome face, even his frown made people feel intoxicated. Ning Xiangyuan was thinking about who this person in front of her was and how to start the conversation when she saw Yin Xiao running over from afar. When she saw Xiao Qin, her face turned pale. She quickly kneeled and shouted, "This servant greets the 9th emperors." 9th emperors? Ning Xiangyuan was shocked by Yin Xiao's address. She looked up and saw that the person standing in front of her was the famous 9th emperors. The 9th emperors had always been elusive. It was Ning Xiangyuan's first time seeing Xiao Qin at such a close distance. Greetings to the 9th emperors. Ning Xiangyuan quickly bowed, and Xiao Qin frowned and looked at Yin Xiao indifferently. Since she was Yin Xiao's servant, she must be a guest that Jingyu brought back. Xiao Qin shook his head helplessly. Was this woman out of control when he wasn't home? Xiao Qin didn't say anything else. He walked past the 2 of them and left. Ning Xiangyuan stood up and looked at Xiao Qin's departing figure. A strange emotion flashed across her eyes. So this was the legendary 9th emperors. She didn't expect that she would be lucky enough to see the 9th emperors at such a close distance. Young Lady Ning. Yin Xiao slowly heaved a sigh of relief. She looked at Xiao Qin's departing figure and called out, "The imperial concubine said that young Lady Shangguan is already waiting for you at the entrance of the residence. She asked you to go over now." Ning Xiangyuan slowly retracted her gaze and followed Yin Xiao's footsteps. Ning Xiangyuan still looked absent-minded all the way out of the residence. Shangguan Linglan looked at Ning Xiangyuan strangely and asked a few questions. Ning Xiangyuan didn't say anything. After Jingyu sent the 2 of them off, she returned to the lotus garden and noticed that the atmosphere wasn't right. She immediately stopped in her tracks and looked at Yin Xiao carefully and asked, "Yin Xiao, did you notice that our courtyard suddenly became much quieter?" "The 9th emperors is back." Yin Xiao lowered her head and said quietly, "What?" Jingyu was so shocked that she almost jumped up. She blinked her eyes and didn't recover from the shock. When Jingyu walked into the room and saw Xiao Chun sitting on the soft couch with a teacup in his hand, she finally realized that Xiao Chun was back. When did this happen? Why didn't she know about it? You sent them off? Xiao Chun narrowed his eyes and looked at Jingyu. He put down the teacup in his hand and asked, cough cough, sent them off. Jingyu stood in her original spot and didn't dare to move. They are all your friends? Xiao Chun asked again. Yes. Jingyu lowered her head even more. She was now living under someone else's roof. Originally, it should have been fine to bring her friends into play when Xiao Chun wasn't around. However, why did Xiao Chun suddenly come back? Furthermore, he came back in such a timely manner. She was caught red-handed. Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu's lowered head. A trace of a smile flashed across his eyes as he said in a deep voice, You brought outsiders into the residence without the permission of this king. Tell me, how is this king going to punish you? That. Jingyu panicked when she heard this. She thought about how to explain herself. However, when Jingyu looked up and saw Xiao Chun's calm eyes, she lowered her hand silently and pouted. I was wrong. Chapter 94. Xiao Chun frowned as if he hadn't heard her. I was wrong. I won't bring anyone back to the residence in the future, Jingyu said loudly with her eyes closed. Xiao Chun's face darkened when he heard this. So all his words were in vain. This woman was so stupid that she couldn't understand what he meant. When did this king tell you not to bring anyone back to the residence? Xiao Chun looked coldly at Jingyu as he spoke. Jingyu was stunned when she heard this. She blinked and looked at Xiao Chun with a confused expression. This king is the master of the residence. If you bring a friend back, shouldn't you be receiving this king at the same time? Or, do you still not have the slightest awareness of being the mistress of this residence? Xiao Chun's eyes were faintly filled with anger. Jingyu finally understood. So Xiao Chun was angry at her for not telling him in advance so that he could be prepared. I thought you weren't home. Who told you not to tell me when you came back? Jingyu pouted. She knew that Xiao Chun wasn't blaming her. She immediately became bolder. After standing for most of the day, she was already tired of standing. As she spoke, she walked to the soft couch and sat down next to Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun watched as Jingyu sat down to pour tea and drink water. He helplessly rubbed his forehead. It seemed that the training in the academy hadn't extinguished the wildness in Jingyu's bones. This knowledge made Xiao Chun very happy. Don't do it again, Xiao Chun said indifferently. It wasn't clear if he was saying that he would tell Jingyu in advance that he was coming back, or if he was saying that Jingyu would warn him before bringing anyone back, or if Xiao Chun was actually saying both. Jingyu excitedly told Xiao Chun everything that had happened over the past few days. It seemed to have become a habit of hers. Xiao Chun had only asked a question, but Jingyu was able to talk endlessly. In the end, Jingyu's mouth was dry from talking, but Xiao Chun only gave a few indifferent noises of acknowledgement. Am I being too long-winded? Jingyu was slightly embarrassed. She blinked and asked Xiao Chun. No, Xiao Chun said with a serious expression. That's good. Jingyu smiled contentedly. She turned to look at Xiao Chun and asked, after talking for so long, I forgot to ask, why did you suddenly come back? I finished my business, so I naturally came back. Xiao Chun raised his eyebrows and said, so fast. Jingyu sighed. She hadn't had enough of her carefree days yet. What? You don't want to see this king? Xiao Chun's face darkened as he stared at Jingyu. I wouldn't dare, haha. Jingyu laughed dryly and stood up. I'm so hungry, let's go eat. Xiao Chun raised his eyebrows and nodded. Let's go together. Jingyu looked up at Xiao Chun's height and silently mourned in her heart. When will he grow taller? After the meal, Jingyu's appetite was very good. Even Xiao Chun's appetite was very good. Sitting together with Jingyu, it was as if the food that Xiao Chun didn't have any special taste had become extraordinarily delicious. After the meal, Jingyu didn't return to her room. Instead, she took a walk in the courtyard. Jingyu originally thought that Xiao Chun would go to the study to deal with official business as usual. Unexpectedly, Xiao Chun didn't go. Instead, he walked in the courtyard with Jingyu. Chapter 95. Jingyu blinked as she looked at Xiao Chun, who was walking beside her, and asked, "Eh? Isn't it good to keep you company?" Xiao Chun asked as he looked at Jingyu. "Cough, cough. Don't talk like that. It's so mushy." Jingyu rubbed her arms and turned to walk towards the pavilion in the middle of the pond. Jingyu had asked someone to put a large lounge chair there, and it was perfect for lying down. Xiao Chun raised his eyebrows and looked at Jingyu's figure as she ran over. The corner of his mouth twitched, and he strode over and picked up Jingyu without hesitation. He sat down and let Jingyu lean on his body. Jingyu froze and wanted to move, but she was easily suppressed by Xiao Chun. Jingyu had been with Xiao Chun for a long time, so she already knew his habits. For example, right now, the best choice was to not move. Otherwise, she would be the one to suffer. Jingyu silently lowered her arms and gave up struggling. She leaned on Xiao Chun with a clear conscience. Xiao Chun raised his hand and played with Jingyu's raised hand. The two were silent for a long time. Then Xiao Chun said, "Today, Jing Zhan came looking for me." Jingyu, who was originally leaning on Xiao Chun lazily, heard Xiao Chun's words and her entire body tensed up. Xiao Chun easily noticed this change in her movements. He raised his hand to hold Jingyu's hand and said, "If you don't want to see him, then don't." What did he say? Jingyu slowly let out a few breaths to calm her heart and asked with her eyes closed. "He wants you to give him a chance," Xiao Chun said calmly. "He knows everything you said to Jing Lang." "It doesn't matter. I don't want to see him." Jingyu lowered her eyes and said, "Please tell him that I don't want to have anything to do with him. Tell him not to appear in front of me." Xiao Chun's expression changed slightly. He looked at Jingyu, who had her head lowered, and his heart trembled. He raised his hand to cup Jingyu's cheek and looked at her seemingly calm face. He sighed and said, "Jingyu, you belong to me, Xiao Chun. If you don't want to, then no one can force you. Remember." Xiao Chun leaned over and planted a light kiss on Jingyu's forehead. Perhaps at this moment, even Xiao Chun himself didn't know how gentle he was. Jingyu's heart was filled with warmth. In this strange world, this was the first time she felt this kind of warmth that could burn a person's heart. Jingyu lowered her eyes with a faint smile in her eyes. However, when she touched Xiao Chun's light kiss, her heart was in chaos. Of course I know." Jingyu suddenly stood up and said with a faint blush on her cheeks, I'm so sleepy. I'm going to sleep." She didn't give Xiao Chun any time to react and ran away like a wisp of smoke. Seeing her fleeing figure, Xiao Chun's eyes were filled with a faint smile. Jingyu turned around and closed the door behind her. She patted her burning cheeks and muttered, "Xiao Chun, that bastard. Why did he say such emotional words?" Jingyu's face turned red again. She hurriedly ran to the bed and lay down on it without moving. Jingyu didn't know if Xiao Chun slept in her room that night. In any case, when she woke up, she didn't see Xiao Chun's figure and didn't bother to asking Xiao. Anyway, Xiao Chun was a busy man who always appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Chapter 96. Jingyu yawned as she entered the school. When she reached the entrance, she saw Ning Shengyuan, who had just arrived. She immediately went up to greet her with a smile. Ning Shengyuan affectionately chatted with Jingyu, but as she spoke, she couldn't help but look at the carriage behind Jingyu. "What's wrong?" Jingyu felt Ning Shengyuan's gaze and turned around in confusion. Nothing. I just wanted to see if Lan Lan is here yet." Ning Shengyuan's eyes flashed with panic, and she quickly looked down with a smile. "She always comes quite early, so she should be inside already. Let's go in." Jingyu didn't think there was anything wrong, so she casually replied and pulled Ning Shengyuan into the school. As expected, Shangguan Linglan was already inside. "Jingyu, come quickly." Shangguan Linglan also saw Jingyu and Ning Shengyuan. He waved at them and happily said, "Do you know what we're learning today?" "What are we learning?" "As long as it's not about kneeling, anything is fine," Jingyu said as she rolled her eyes. "I just heard Countess Xiling say that we're learning how to eat today," Shangguan Linglan said with a wink. "Pfft, we're learning how to eat?" Jingyu spat out blood and stared at Shangguan Linglan with wide eyes. Shangguan Linglan pulled Jingyu aside and said, "There are a lot of banquets and etiquette, so this is probably what we're learning. Then, does that mean we can eat and drink for free?" Jingyu's eyes turned slightly, and her eyes revealed a look of pleasant surprise. Thinking about how she could eat for free at school was simply a dream come true. She wondered if she could learn how to sleep. She was very willing to learn. However, when Jingyu walked into the school with this thought in mind, she was instantly petrified. She stared at the empty plates in front of her, and the corner of her mouth twitched. This was the legendary free meal? Jingyu's eyes widened as she looked at the empty plates on the table and the words on them. It was really simple. If you just put a note on it and wrote fish, then the dish was fish. If you put a note on it, then it was chicken. Jingyu closed her eyes fiercely. After this lesson, Jingyu didn't remember anything at all. Her mind was filled with thoughts of what to eat after class. She held on to this thought with all her might and finally held on until school was over. I can't. Jingyu pulled Shangguan Linglan with one hand and Ning Xiangyuan with the other and said, "This lady is about to die from hunger. Let's go and eat." "Jingyu, slow down." Ning Xiangyuan struggled to keep up with Jingyu, while Shangguan Linglan looked even more anxious than Jingyu. He strode over to Jingyu and said, "Let's not sit in a carriage, let's ride a horse." "Ahem. Big sister, this is the main street. You'll be caught if you ride a horse." Jingyu stepped out of the school gates and almost tripped over the threshold when she heard Shangguan Linglan's words. "I am Shangguan Linglan. Who dares to catch me?" Shangguan Linglan arrogantly raised his eyebrows and said, if he still wants to stay in the imperial city, he wouldn't be so stupid as to provoke the general's residence. Okay. He has a strong background, but I don't like trouble. So, let's just sit in the carriage obediently, Jingyu said as she pushed Shangguan Linglan onto her carriage. She reached out to grab Ning Xiangyuan, but she avoided her. Chapter 97. Ning Xiangyuan smiled and looked at Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan as she said, "You guys go ahead. I still have something to do at home, so I won't go with you guys." Okay then. Jingyu was slightly stunned. She patted Ning Xiangyuan's shoulder and said, "Let's go together next time. If you have something to do, you can go back first." Okay. Ning Xiangyuan smiled gently and looked at Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan. She turned and got into her carriage. Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan drove the carriage to the street. Shanghai Linglan looked at Jingyu with a frown and said, "Jingyu, did you notice something wrong with Yuan today?" I looked at her for a long time and noticed that she was absent-minded the whole day. "Now that you mention it, I think so too." Jingyu frowned and said, "Could it be that her father encountered some trouble in the officialdom?" "I'm not sure. I'll ask tomorrow. If I can help, I'll help," Shangguan Linglan said with a frown. We'll see." Jingyu waved her hand and looked at Shangguan Linglan and said, "Have you thought about where to eat?" "The splendid feast house." Shangguan Linglan pointed and said resolutely, "You can." Jingyu paused and looked at Shangguan Linglan and said, "But did you bring enough money?" I don't know if it's enough. My brother always paid for us to go to Jinyan restaurant." Shangguan Linglan was slightly stunned. He took out a roll of banknotes from his pouch and handed it to Jingyu. He asked, "Is this enough?" I don't know." Jingyu spread her hands. She still didn't understand what banknotes meant in ancient times and how goods were exchanged. "I don't care. If it's not enough, I have more here." Jingyu waved her hand impatiently and said, "If it's not enough, I'll call Xiao Chan to pay the bill." So domineering. When Shangguan Linglan heard this, she immediately gave Jingyu a thumbs up. The meaning of this gesture was told to her by Jingyu. She realized that when she was with Jingyu, she would always discover many interesting things. Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan drove to the Jinyan restaurant. They waved their hands and asked for a private room. They ordered a table full of dishes and sat inside. Suddenly, they felt like a big boss. This feeling made Jingyu inexplicably enjoy. Back then, she had also stood at the top of the world. Of course, it was only for one night. The dishes are served. While Jingyu was reminiscing, Shangguan Linglan, who was sitting on the floor, was already impatient. When he saw the dishes, his eyes lit up like a hungry wolf. However, he didn't dare to eat because the person serving the dishes was still here. Wow! Jingyu looked at the plate of chicken. She didn't care about anything else and reached out to grab it. The manservant who was carrying the dish widened his eyes in astonishment. Seeing Jingyu's unscrupulous action of tearing the chicken apart, He was simply dumbfounded. This crude action simply did not match Jingyu's fine clothes at all. Jingyu, you're cheating. Shangguan Linglan couldn't take it anymore. He rushed to the table and tried to snatch the food from Jingyu. Two beautiful women who looked dignified. But they only looked dignified. They ate heartily at the dining table. The servant who was carrying the dishes was stunned for a long time before he remembered to put down the dishes and left the room. His eyes were full of surprise. He couldn't help but wonder if these two people were pretending to be rich people, or if they actually stole the clothes they were wearing. Chapter 98. As soon as he had this thought, the waiter was shocked. He hurriedly ran to the front counter and reported this matter to the manager. When the manager of Jinyan Restaurant heard this, he felt that the waiter's words made sense. He sneaked over to take a look and was completely stunned by the way Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan ate. In all these years, we've never seen anyone with such table manners, let alone a woman. The manager silently wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and sent someone to watch Jingyu's private room. As soon as Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan tried to escape, they would be immediately arrested. Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan ate happily, completely unaware that they were being watched and listed as little liars and dine and dash. After the meal, Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan were so full that they couldn't move. "Io, the doctor said that we can't overeat, otherwise it's not good for our health," Jingyu said with narrowed eyes as she lazily leaned back on the soft chair behind her. "Doctor? Who's the doctor? Why do you listen to him so much?" Shangguan Linglan was also like this. When he heard Jingyu's words, his heart skipped a beat and he tilted his head to look at Jingyu. "Oh, the doctor you're talking about," Jingyu said with her head tilted. She muttered in her heart, "I spoke too fast and forgot that this is ancient times. A doctor is a doctor. What kind of strange title is that? Could it be that a doctor named Doctor said it?" Shangguan Linglan rolled his eyes and looked at Jingyu as he spoke. Jingyu coughed and decisively chose to shut her mouth. The two of them chatted casually as they rubbed their round bellies. They asked someone to clear the table, and the two of them sat on the soft couch by the window, looking at the scenery outside. They called for tea and snacks after the meal and continued to sit. The two of them leaned against the window and looked at the people coming and going below. Whenever they saw a beautiful person, they would judge them. They laughed and joked around. It was a special kind of fun. Just as the two of them were fooling around, they heard a commotion outside the private room. Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan looked at each other and saw the confusion in each other's eyes. Wasn't this the VIP room? Why would someone come to disturb them? "I don't care. I just want this room. Tell the people inside to come out." This sharp scream was heard by Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan inside the room. They immediately understood that a rich person had come and wanted to drive them out. "Princess Leong, this lowly person really can't make the decision." The voices outside continued. Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan looked at each other and were about to stand up to open the door. Unexpectedly, before they could stand up, the door was knocked open. "I was wondering who it was. So it's just two little girls." Jingyu widened her eyes and looked at the woman in front of her who was wearing a delicate pink dress. "Who is this person? Why haven't I seen her before? Hey, you two get out of here immediately. This princess has taken a fancy to this room." The woman called Princess Leong looked at Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan with disdain and said, "Innkeeper, your Jinyan restaurant has such a rule?" Jingyu blinked and looked past Princess Leong. She looked at the innkeeper behind her and said, "Didn't you say that your Jinyan restaurant is very famous? Is this how you treat your distinguished guests?" "Huh, what a joke. What kind of distinguished guests are you?" Princess Leong was immediately unhappy. She looked at Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan with disdain, and Jingyu's face turned cold. She was actually looked down upon and looked down upon. Chapter 99. This was simply intolerable. The rich ones are the lords. Jingyu waved her hand and arrogantly sat on the soft chair. She squinted her eyes at Princess Leong and said, "I will sit here first. What right do you have to ask me to give way? You. How dare you? Do you know who I am?" Princess Leong looked at Jingyu's arrogant manner and was so angry that her face turned green. She had finally left the palace and did not expect that someone would dare to not respect her. She immediately lost her temper. I know, you are Princess Leong. Jingyu blinked her eyes indifferently and said, Isn't it just a princess? It's not like I haven't seen you before. How dare you insult the imperial family? Princess Leong glared at Jingyu and said loudly, Do you believe that I will give the order to kill you? You are just a girl, and you are always shouting about fighting and killing. I don't think you are a princess. You are more like a hooligan on the streets. Jingyu disdainfully raised the corner of her mouth and said, Besides, you don't believe in Shao. What kind of imperial family are you? You. Princess Leong was speechless after hearing Jingyu's words. No one had ever dared to talk to her like this. Everyone who heard her name would avoid her. Who would have thought that she would meet someone like Jingyu today? Let's not talk nonsense. You want this house, right? Jingyu slightly raised her eyebrows and said, Yes, what do you want me to do for you to leave? Princess Leong slightly took a deep breath and said, Since this is a place to eat, drink, and spend money, then it is easy to talk. Whoever has more money gets to talk. Jingyu looked at Princess Leong and said with a smile. When Shangguan Linglan heard Jingyu's words, he immediately widened his eyes in horror. He touched the pouch on his waist and swallowed his saliva. This was the first time he met someone who had more money than him. Huh? Princess Leong looked at Jingyu from head to toe, as if she had heard something ridiculous. It was as if she was examining a fool. However, Jingyu looked at Princess Leong calmly. You said that you want to compete with me in terms of wealth? Princess Leong looked at Jingyu and asked. Yes. Jingyu nodded seriously and said, You don't have to say anything. The amount of money you can take out right now is more than what we have. We will definitely pack up and leave immediately. We will respectfully call you Princess. No problem. When Princess Leong heard this, she immediately agreed without any hesitation. If you lose, then I won't make things difficult for you. Just stand in the main hall of the Jinyan Pavilion and shout, I'm an idiot 3 times. Jingyu smiled as she looked at Princess Leong. What you? Hey, do you dare to compete? Jingyu raised her hand and interrupted Princess Leong. She raised her eyebrows and looked at Princess Leong provocatively. Let's compete. Do you think I'm afraid of you? Princess Leong was infuriated by Jingyu's provocative tone and immediately agreed. Jingyu stood up and said, I'll compete with her. You and the people behind you. Let's compete with the amount of money we have. Take out the money for this, princess. Princess Leong raised her chin and shouted loudly, Yes. The guards behind her all took out their purses and poured the money on the table. Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan looked at the money and banknotes. They opened their eyes wide and didn't know why they suddenly felt guilty. Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan looked at each other. They looked at the pile of money with a strange expression. Chapter 100. It's gold. Jingyu looked at the glistening gold and her eyes almost fell out. Gold was very valuable and could not be compared to RMB in the modern era. What should we do? We don't seem to have any gold. Jingyu looked at Shangguan Linglan and said with a crying face, We don't have any gold. Shangguan Linglan blinked and looked at the gold. Hey, don't tell me you don't have any money? Princess Leong looked at Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan's eyes, shining as they looked at the pile of silver. It was obvious that they had not seen the world, and she immediately laughed in disdain. Who said we don't have any? Jingyu straightened her body. Her attempt to hide it made the surrounding people look at her strangely. If you have it, then take it out. Princess Leong sneered and looked at Jingyu. Her face was full of complacency as she looked at Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan as if they were going to win. Cough, cough. Jingyu touched Shangguan Linglan and signaled him to take out the banknotes. Shangguan Linglan looked at Jingyu helplessly and silently prepared himself to lose face with Jingyu. He suddenly stood up and took out his purse. Under the astonished eyes of the crowd, he took out a thick stack of banknotes and slammed it on the table. He said in a domineering manner, I didn't bring much. It's all here. Shangguan Linglan silently said in his heart. No matter what, he could not lose his imposing manner. The surrounding people sucked in a breath of cold air. They did not expect Shangguan Linglan to be so generous and throw out banknotes. Looking at the amount on the banknotes, it was 10,000 taels. Then why did the two of them look so scared just now? Everyone felt dizzy. How could he scare them like that? That, I have less than her. Jingyu looked at the banknotes that Shangguan Linglan threw out and was speechless. His posture was handsome. When everyone heard Jingyu's words, they turned their heads to Jingyu. They all stared at Jingyu as she took out the banknotes from her belt. Everyone's gaze was also on Jingyu's hand. There's some here. Jingyu threw out a roll of banknotes and put her hand into her sleeve. She silently threw out another roll of banknotes and said, "There's some here. Oh, there's some here. And here." Everyone looked at the banknotes that Jingyu kept throwing out. Their hearts trembled and their eyes widened. They watched as Jingyu touched the banknotes up and down. She looked at the crowd and said awkwardly, "I think there's no more." A chuckle came and completely woke everyone up. Everyone looked over and saw a young master standing outside. Wasn't that Fang Ziqing? Sorry, I couldn't help it. Fang Ziqing's face was full of smiles. He coughed and waved his hand at the crowd and said, "I'm just here to watch the fun." But Fang Ziqing paused and pointed at the banknotes that were thrown on the table and said, "It looks like the winner has been decided." I don't even need to count." Jingyu was stunned and said quietly, "If I knew, I would have brought more." "If you brought more, you could have bought the entire Jinyan restaurant, not to mention this small private room." Fang Ziqing's eyes were full of smiles as he pointed at the banknotes on the table and said. Chapter 101. Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan were slightly stunned. They blinked their eyes and looked at the banknotes on the table and said, "So, we won?" "Obviously, yes." Fang Ziqing spread his hands and said, "Ha ha ha ha." Jingyu instantly laughed out loud. She changed her timid appearance and stood on the chair aggressively. She looked down at Princess Leong and said, "How is it? Do you admit defeat?" I. Princess Leong's face turned red. She looked at Jingyu and couldn't say anything for a long time. "Let me tell everyone this. Don't look down on others." Jingyu raised her chin and looked down at Princess Leong. She said, "If you agree to a bet, you must accept your loss." Shouldn't Princess Leong fulfill the bet? If you want to break the bet, it's fine. Anyway, there are so many people watching. I don't care. Jingyu spread her hands proudly. Princess Leong was so angry that she almost cried. A sense of humiliation came from the bottom of her heart. Princess Leong bit her lips and walked out of the private room without saying a word. She walked to the stage in the hall and looked at the pairs of mocking eyes below. Her eyes were filled with tears. "I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot. Remember this. I won't let you go." Princess Leong glared at Jingyu fiercely. She didn't dare to stay for a second longer. She hurriedly ran down the stage and left. TSK. Your courage is commendable." Jingyu's eyes were filled with admiration. She wasn't moved by Princess Leong's threat at all. She seems to have forgotten to take the money. Jingyu blinked her eyes. She suddenly thought of something and her eyes lit up. She said, "Does this mean that the money belongs to me?" Cough, cough. You guys made a bet. The money should belong to you. Fang Ziqing looked at Jingyu's greedy look. She didn't hide it at all and was clearly displayed. He didn't hate her at all. Instead, he felt that she was very sincere. "Waha, that's great. I've struck it rich." Jingyu immediately cheered. She extravagantly called the shopkeeper over to settle the bill for the private room. When the bill was settled, Jingyu suddenly looked at the shopkeeper with a serious expression and asked, Is the silver note or the gold more valuable?" When the shopkeeper heard this, his hand trembled and he dialed the wrong number. He raised his head and looked at Jingyu in horror. Then, he turned to look at Shangguan Linglan, who had a curious expression on his face. His entire body trembled. What kind of monster had he seen today? Not only did he dare to offend the princess, but he could also casually throw out tens of millions of taels of silver. And now, he was actually asking him which was more valuable, silver notes or gold. Could these two things be compared? Could it? "We won't pay the bill. Ladies, this meal is on the house. You're welcome to come again." The shopkeeper tried his best to steady his breathing. He swallowed his saliva and looked at the two. "This is a gift from my Jinyan pavilion. Please accept it." Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan both blinked and looked at the two dark green rings the shopkeeper gave them. They suddenly blinked in surprise. There was a gift for Emil? Jinyan Pavilion actually gave out identity rings. Fang Zicheng's eyes widened in surprise. He looked at the ring in Jingyu's hand and said with envy, "I don't have one, but you actually have one." Chapter 102. What is this? Jingyu tried it on and found that it fit best on her index finger. She immediately nodded in satisfaction. "From now on, you two will be my Jinyan restaurant's honored guests. If you need anything, just let me know," the shopkeeper said with a smile and turned to leave. Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan both laughed. Jingyu suddenly stopped and rushed to the door, shouting at the shopkeeper, "Is there a discount for eating?" The shopkeeper was coming down the stairs when he heard Jingyu's shout. He staggered and almost fell down the stairs. He turned around and said angrily, "It's free. All free." Huh. Jingyu was slightly surprised when she heard this. She immediately cheered and held the ring in her hand like it was a treasure. She said with a smile, "This is my rice bowl. My rice bowl. I can't lose it. This thing is actually so useful." Shangguan Linglan tossed the ring in his hand and put it on his middle finger. The two looked at each other and began to divide the money on the table. After dividing the money, they suddenly realized a very important problem. They didn't have anything to put it in. Just as Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan were in a dilemma, Jingyan Restaurant actually sent a small box for the two of them to put the money in. Jingyu was immediately convinced by the service and exclaimed, "What a good place! By the way, why are you here?" Jingyu put away her money and turned to look at Fang Zicheng, who was still waiting at the side, and asked, "I just happened to pass by." Fang Zicheng was slightly surprised and said with a smile, "SK, who are you trying to fool?" Jingyu rolled her eyes disdainfully and said, "I think you've asked some young lady to come to the Jinyan Restaurant for a date? Haha, even if I have an appointment, it would be with you." Fang Zicheng laughed and said the last sentence without thinking. Suddenly, the room fell into a strange atmosphere. Shangguan Linglan silently turned his head and pretended that he didn't hear anything. "Ahem. I was joking." Fang Zicheng coughed and said, "What do you plan to do with Princess Liang?" "Her? What's wrong with her?" Jingyu blinked her eyes, looking confused. "You have offended Princess Liang. Imperial concubine Fu will definitely not let it go." Fang Zicheng looked at Jingyu's confused face and said helplessly, "Did this woman not know that she had caused a lot of trouble?" "Wait." Jingyu suddenly jumped up and looked at Fang Zicheng in horror and said, "Could it be that Princess Liang is Imperial concubine Fu's illegitimate daughter?" Shangguan Linglan, who was drinking tea, spat it all over the table and looked at Jingyu in horror. He couldn't imagine what Jingyu was thinking when she said that. Fang Zicheng was also shocked by Jingyu and was speechless for a long time. "Could it be I said something wrong?" Jingyu blinked and asked in confusion, "Jingyu, did you take the wrong medicine? Or did you have a mental problem in the past?" Shangguan Linglan looked at Jingyu seriously and asked, "You are the one who took the wrong medicine." "I didn't take any medicine." Jingyu glared at Shangguan Linglan angrily and said. She was speechless and said, "No, I don't need to take medicine. I am not sick." "I am confused by your words." Princess Liang is Imperial concubine Fu's younger sister, the second daughter of the Grand Preceptor. Fang Zicheng really didn't want to go anymore and rubbed his temples. Chapter 103. Jingyu paused for a moment, then looked at Fang Zicheng in horror and said, "So, I tricked Imperial concubine Fu's sister?" Fang Zicheng nodded silently. Jingyu paused for a moment, then under the shocked gazes of Fang Zicheng and Shangguan Linglan, she hugged the box of money and ran out, saying, Lan, let's run, before Fu Ruoqing finds out." "Jingyu." Shangguan Linglan held his forehead and looked at Jingyu helplessly. He suddenly wondered how he was able to stay sane after interacting with Jingyu for so long. "If we don't run now, when are we going to run? I've personally experienced Fu Ruoqing's methods of dealing with people." Jingyu said, speechless. "So you didn't know that Princess Liang was Imperial concubine Fu's sister?" Fang Zicheng blinked and asked Jingyu, Of course I didn't know. If I had known, I would have given up this position immediately. Jingyu hugged the box and said pitifully, "You guys didn't tell me. Princess Leong is Imperial concubine Fu's sister. Everyone in the Imperial City should know this." Fang Ziqing said quietly, then turned to look at Jingyu and said, "You didn't even know who was behind Princess Leong, and you dared to offend her? I'm impressed." Shangguan Linglan said quietly, "I thought you could do whatever you wanted because you had the support of the 9 emperors." Huh? Jingyu paused and looked at Fang Ziqing, then looked at Shangguan Linglan. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something and said, "Oh right. I forgot that I still have Xiao Chun. Why would I run?" "You really don't have the slightest awareness of being the 9th imperial concubine." Shangguan Linglan sighed faintly and continued to drink the tea. She leaned against the window leisurely and slightly narrowed her eyes. Suddenly, she saw an acquaintance. Why is Jing Lang here as well? Is he here to look for you?" Shangguan Linglan blinked and turned to look at Fang Ziqing. "What? Who's here?" Before Fang Ziqing could speak, he heard Jingyu suddenly jump up and exclaim in horror. "Young Master Jing Lang of the Jing clan," said Shangguan Linglan, blinking. "Shit. Quick, quick, quick. Let's go." Jingyu was like a mouse that had seen a cat. She scurried around, grabbed Shangguan Linglan's hand, and rushed out of the private room at lightning speed. She didn't even go through the main door of the Jinyan restaurant and slipped out of the side door. When Jing Lang walked into the private room, he saw Fang Ziqing sitting on one side with a sluggish look on his face. There was no one else around him. Jing Lang was stunned. He looked at Fang Ziqing and said, "Why are you alone? Where are Jing Yu and the others?" "Come, let's not talk about Jing Yu for now. Let's talk about you." Fang Ziqing smiled brightly at Jing Lang and said, "What did you do to Jing Yu that made her run away as soon as she heard your name?" "She left?" Jing Lang's face suddenly became gloomy. Fang Ziqing sensed Jing Lang's gloominess at a glance. He stared at Jing Lang in horror and said, You couldn't have done something to Jing Yu. Shut up. What nonsense are you talking about?" Jing Lang stared at Fang Ziqing coldly and said, "She's not here. I'm leaving." Chapter 104. Hey. Why are you leaving me like this, Scram? Jingyu hugged the chest with one hand and pulled Shangguan Linglan with the other as they ran to her carriage at the back door of Jian Lu. Only then did she let out a sigh of relief. She patted her beating heart and sighed in her heart that she had escaped a disaster. "Jingyu, you better tell me the truth. What secrets do you have with Jing Lang? Is it worth it to run away as soon as you hear his name?" Shangguan Linglan caught his breath and stared at Jingyu as he spoke. "AI, it's a long story." Jingyu let out a dispirited sigh and said, "I'll tell you next time. Just remember, if anyone has any connection to the father and son of Jing Lang sees them, you must remind me so that I can be ready to run away at any time." Shangguan Linglan paused slightly and looked at Jingyu with a frown. "You owe them money? Go. I think they're the kind of people who owe money and don't pay it back." Jingyu stared at Shangguan Linglan with disdain as she spoke. "Yes." Shangguan Linglan replied with a serious expression. "I." Jingyu raised her fist and was about to hit Shangguan Linglan when she was stopped by a voice behind her. "Imperial concubine, the 9th emperor sent this subordinate to take you back to the Fu." Jingyu paused slightly and turned around in fear. She shouted, "When did you get here? This subordinate has been standing here the entire time." Xing Er silently lowered his head. I didn't notice at all." Jingyu chuckled and patted Shangguan Linglan's shoulder. "See you tomorrow. I'm going back first." Remember to tell me why next time," Shangguan Linglan said as he watched Jingyu get into the carriage. "I know," Jingyu replied loudly. She turned around and got into the carriage, heading back to the Wang Fu. Jingyu rushed to Xiao Chen's study as soon as she returned to the Wang Fu. The person hadn't arrived yet, but her voice had arrived first. The shouting and yelling made the hidden guards around Xiao Chen accustomed to it. Xiao Chen silently raised his head from a pile of documents and watched as Jingyu happily rushed into his study. She hugged a box and slammed it on his desk. She excitedly said to Xiao Chen, "Guess what's inside?" "Money." Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu expressionlessly. Haha, I knew you wouldn't guess. Wait, you said it was money. Jingyu suddenly stopped laughing and stared at Xiao Chun in shock. Xiao Chun nodded indifferently, looking bored. How did you know? Jingyu blinked and looked at Xiao Chun. She suddenly felt wronged. He actually guessed it. How boring. Not only did I know it was money, I also knew it was Princess Liang's money. Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu indifferently. How did you know? Could it be? Great. You sent someone to follow me. Jingyu suddenly raised her eyebrows and glared at Xiao Chun. If I wanted to follow you, I would have done it openly. Xiao Chun removed the box Jingyu placed on the desk and said indifferently, Your deeds have already spread throughout the imperial city. What else do you think you have to say? Jingyu was shocked. The power of the masses was indeed strong. It hadn't been long, but the entire imperial city knew about it. Didn't that mean the person in the imperial palace also knew about it? Thinking of this, Jingyu instantly lost her composure. Chapter 105. At this thought, Jingyu lost her composure. Xiao Chun. Jingyu hurriedly ran to Xiao Chin's side and looked at him, blinking her eyes. Yes? Xiao Chun lowered his head and continued to read the documents as he responded calmly. Let me ask you a very important question. Jingyu looked at Xiao Chun with a serious expression. Go ahead, Xiao Chun replied calmly. He did not look like he was listening to an important question at all. If your childhood sweetheart imperial concubine Fu wants to kill me, will you help me or her? Jingyu stared at Xiao Chun with a serious expression as she spoke. Xiao Chen's hand that was holding the pen suddenly froze, and the black ink stained the document in his hand. Xiao Chun slowly put down the pen in his hand and looked at Jingyu with a terrifyingly deep gaze. Jingyu shuddered under Xiao Chen's gaze. She swallowed and laughed dryly. I was just talking nonsense. Don't take it seriously. Haha, I won't let that happen. Just as Jingyu was about to get up and leave, Xiao Chen suddenly spat out these words. Jingyu paused and a bright smile appeared on her lips. She raised her hands and picked up the box on the table. Xiao Chen, I am not the kind of person who will not retaliate when hit or scolded, Jingyu said calmly, and turned to leave. Understood. Xiao Chun raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at Jingyu's back as she left. A look of contemplation flashed across his eyes. Jingyu smiled and waved her hand as she walked out of the study and towards the Lotus Court. The revenge that Jingyu had expected did not come. It was so peaceful that Jingyu wondered if she had not offended Princess Liang at all. It was Princess Liang who had offended her. The days in the college were as usual. Only Mother Yun was happy, because Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan, who had been reluctant to study, were working very hard, which made Mother Yun very happy. There should be no elimination in this assessment. However, Jingyu was preparing to do something earth-shattering today. As a matter of fact, she had run off early in the morning after leaving the academy. Second interrogation officer, who had been waiting outside, had also been ditched by Jingyu. As for Jingyu herself, she was currently wandering aimlessly in an unknown alley, blinking and looking at the buildings that looked almost the same in front of her with a face full of questions. Strange, which courtyard did I run to last time? Jingyu muttered to herself as she jumped up and looked inside one of the courtyards. Last time, Jingyu accidentally entered the courtyard and saw that person. She could not forget that person. Driven by some unknown thoughts, Jingyu finally decided to take a look again. Last time, she ran too fast and did not see that person's face clearly. I remember that it was here. Jingyu cautiously approached the dilapidated courtyard door. This time, the door was tightly shut. Jingyu went forward and pushed it. When she found that it was not locked, she carefully pushed the door open and looked inside. When she saw the dilapidated house and the weeds on the ground, Jingyu knew that she had found the right place. She suddenly quivered and lowered her breathing. Step by step, she followed the path in her memory and carefully walked inside. When the familiar bamboo forest came into view, Jingyu suddenly became timid. The man's face clearly replayed in her mind like a magic spell, which made Jingyu's heart tremble uncontrollably. She felt that she should not have done this. Chapter 106. Just as Jingyu paused, she suddenly heard movement behind her. Her heart skipped a beat, and she immediately rolled into the grass to hide. Squatting in the distance, she quietly watched as a pair of footsteps slowly approached. The footsteps were so light that it was as though the footsteps were not on the grass at all. How deep must one's inner strength be to be able to reach such a level? Jingyu lowered her body even further, afraid that if she was discovered, she would be dismembered in the next second. The pair of black shoes slowly walked past Jingyu and into the pond. Jingyu watched the person's back, but could not see the person's face clearly. Looking at the figure, it was obviously a man dressed in black, and the way he walked was like a ghost. Jingyu's eyes turned, and she slowly stood up. Carefully, she followed the person's footsteps into the pond, but did not dare to get too close. She could only squint her eyes and observe the person's movements from afar. The light veil was lifted, and Jingyu saw a person taking off his clothes. Strange. The person taking off his clothes clearly had black hair. Jingyu looked suspiciously at the light veil that was being blown up by the wind and hanging on the branches of the bamboo leaves. She could clearly see the movements inside the pond. The man who was slowly taking off his outer clothes had a strong and muscular body and did not look any different. With his back facing Jingyu, Jingyu suspected that there were two people, right? Just as Jingyu was letting her imagination run wild, the man who had taken off his outer clothes slowly stepped into the dark green pond. After the man stepped into the pond, Jingyu could clearly see the man's originally black hair slowly change. The black hair was actually turning white at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. Damn, it's a mutation. Jingyu's heart was trembling violently. She covered her mouth tightly and did not allow herself to make a single sound. She continued to watch with wide eyes as the man's bronze skin gradually turned into patches of white spots. The protruding blood vessels began to squirm, and the man's entire body began to tremble. He let out an unbearable groan. The black-clothed man stood quietly at the side. He didn't move at all. The small side of his face was expressionless. It seemed that he was already used to it. It was just like watching a zombie movie. Jingyu watched as the blood vessels in the man's body started to spread upwards bit by bit. When they finally reached his neck, she could clearly see that the blood vessels had turned black and were wriggling densely into his scalp and cheeks. Jingyu did not dare to imagine how painful it would be. Just looking at it, Jingyu felt uncomfortable all over. Jingyu silently swallowed her saliva. Her body carefully moved backward, thinking that she should quickly retreat before she was discovered. However, just as Jingyu retreated a few steps, she suddenly felt a cold, murderous intent piercing towards her from behind. That aura seemed to make Jingyu feel an indescribable fear. It was as if this attack was a sure kill, and she would not be able to dodge it. No, how could she not dodge it? Jingyu's entire body trembled violently. She was in an unimaginably strange position. She almost spun her entire waist and fiercely twisted to the side. She saw with her own eyes that the green dagger had brushed past her neck. Tisk! The dagger stabbed into the ground. Before Jingyu could even take a breath, she saw a black shadow claw towards her neck. Jingyu bent her body and narrowly dodged it. Without any hesitation, she ran out like a madwoman. Just as she ran 2 steps, she suddenly saw countless black shadows descending from above. Chapter 107. Jingyu bent her body and narrowly dodged it. Without any hesitation, she ran out like a madwoman. She had only taken 2 steps when she suddenly saw countless black shadows descending from above. Fuck. There's no end to this. Jingyu was shocked. Why did so many masked men in black suddenly appear? The men in black surrounded Jingyu from all directions. It was obvious that they wanted to keep Jingyu here. Jingyu didn't have a single weapon in her hands, so she couldn't fight back. She could only dodge and roll until her body was covered in dirt. However, these men in black didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. Hiss! Jingyu felt a sharp pain in her arm. A dagger had cut her. Jingyu rolled and knelt on the ground on one knee. She looked at her injured arm, which was already bleeding. Jingyu's eyes slowly filled with anger. Wasn't it just a person? Damn it! Was there a need to be so ruthless? They wanted to kill her without even saying a word. Did they really think she was easy to bully? Jingyu's eyes flashed. She casually picked up a withered bamboo pole from the side. Her eyes slowly turned cold. She suddenly jumped up and attacked the masked men in black. Using the knives in their hands, she sharpened the bamboo pole into a sharp bayonet. Every move she made was ruthless, stabbing at the weak points of the enemy. Jing Yu's eyes were tainted with a bloodthirsty light. As she turned around, something seemed to be beating restlessly in her body. Her pitch-black eyes began to change color. A dark green light flashed in her eyes, so fast that it was hard to detect. Jing Yu threw the bamboo pole in her hand with all her might. She suppressed the abnormal breathing in her chest and ran out of the bamboo forest without looking back. Her mind was temporarily in a mess. An indescribable feeling made Jing Yu feel suffocated. What's going on? I feel like I'm going to die. Jing Yu's breathing became more and more rapid. The color of her eyes kept changing. One moment it was black, and the next moment it was green. Jing Yu used all her strength to rush out of the courtyard. She panicked and ran out of the alley. Her stumbling footsteps and her body was covered in dirt. She looked like a lunatic who had escaped from somewhere. Jing Yu's legs gave way, and she knelt on the ground. She curled up on the ground and looked sideways at her injured arm. Dark black blood was flowing out. No wonder. She was poisoned. Jing Yu's eyes finally fixed on the green. A suffocating feeling came from her chest. Jing Yu suddenly widened her eyes, and her heart thumped hard. All the strength in her body slowly dissipated, and her green eyes slowly faded. When she closed her eyes, they turned pitch black. She wouldn't die if she didn't ask for it. Curiosity didn't just kill the cat, it killed the person too. Jing Yu regretted it so much that her intestines turned green. Her last bit of consciousness was dissipating. She seemed to hear Xing Er's voice in her ears, but Jing Yu couldn't distinguish it anymore. Her thoughts were completely stuck on regret, and she fell into an endless darkness. In the darkness, the white hair swayed in front of her eyes again and again. It was like a curse. The white hair floated and slowly approached her, wrapping around her neck. Jing Yu struggled to resist the white hair, but she realized that she couldn't exert any strength. No, she didn't want to die. She had already died once. Jing Yu's body trembled, and she sat up. Her vision was dizzy, and she fell down again. The chaotic scene in front of her gradually cleared up. Jing Yu was slightly startled by the familiar curtains. She slowly let out a sigh of relief. She didn't die. Chapter 108. Imperial Concubine. Imperial Concubine, you're awake? Yin Xiao's voice sounded beside her ear. Jing Yu slowly turned her head and looked over. When she saw Yin Xiao's tear-filled eyes, she smiled bitterly and sighed. Finally, she could feel the sensation in her body. What happened to me? Jing Yu raised her hand and wanted to rub the space between her eyebrows. However, she realized that her hand didn't seem to be there. She was so shocked that her heart skipped a beat. She turned her head and realized that her entire arm was bandaged. Jing Yu looked at the bandage speechlessly. She didn't even need to think to know that it was Xiao Qian, that perverted fellow, who could bandage her small wound like this. Imperial Concubine, you've been unconscious for 3 days. Yin Xiao's eyes turned red again. She looked at Jing Yu with teary eyes and said, "The 9th Emperor said that you were poisoned. This servant thought that you would never wake up again." "Wu, aren't I awake now? Don't cry." Jing Yu was shocked by Yin Xiao's words. She was actually unconscious for 3 days. This poison was really overbearing. Who brought me back? Jing Yu sat up while holding her arm and asked Yin Xiao. It was the 9th Emperor's. Yin Xiao blinked and said, "The 9th Emperor's carried Imperial Concubine all the way back." Eh? Jing Yu was instantly stunned. This wasn't right. She had clearly fainted outside. How could she be brought back by Xiao Chun? Jing Yu ate the soup that Yin Xiao passed over with a stomach full of questions. She blinked and said, "Where is Xiao Chun?" The 9th Emperors went to the palace. Yin Xiao raised her head and looked at Jing Yu and said, "Eh." Jing Yu instantly widened her eyes. She looked at Yin Xiao in horror and said, "Xiao Chun actually went to the palace? Did something happen in the palace?" This servant doesn't know. Yin Xiao frowned and shook her head. She lowered her head and didn't say anything. Jing Yu was slightly stunned. She had known Yin Xiao for so long. How could she not see that Yin Xiao was lying? It was obvious that Yin Xiao was lying right now. Yin Xiao, are you hiding something from me? Jing Yu put down the bowl in her hand and stared at Yin Xiao with a frown. This servant didn't. Yin Xiao instantly lowered her head nervously. Yin Xiao. Jing Yu frowned as she called out Yin Xiao's name. Her tone was filled with dissatisfaction. Yin Xiao's heart trembled as she hurriedly said, It's because the Imperial Consort suddenly fainted. Ninth Imperial Uncle only entered the palace to take a look. As Yin Xiao's words fell, Jing Yu's hand trembled slightly as she pursed her lips. Xiao quickly raised, it. Maybe something happened. What's there to misunderstand? Jing Yu blinked and waved her hand. I was just thinking. Why did the Imperial concubine suddenly faint? This servant also doesn't know. Yin Xiao sized up Jing Yu again. After confirming that Jing Yu wasn't angry, she slowly let out a sigh of relief. Forget it, it's none of my business, Jing Yu shrugged and said. I'm still very hungry. Go and get something for me to eat. Yes, this servant will do it now. Yin Xiao acknowledged and walked out. Jing Yu slowly stood up, dragging her arm that was wrapped in layers of clothes, and walked out of the house. Looking at the bright and beautiful sunlight, she instantly felt a sense of comfort. This was great. She was still alive and well. Chapter 109. Jing Yu slowly stood up. She dragged her arm that was wrapped in layers and walked out of the house. Looking at the bright sunlight, she immediately felt a sense of comfort. Great. She was still alive and well. But that damned strange man really made Jing Yu gnash her teeth in hatred. Wasn't he just relying on having many subordinates? If he had the ability, then come fight me one-on-one. Humph. Jing Yu stood in front of the door, her expression changing unpredictably. She couldn't get a clear look at that man's face twice, which made Jing Yu very unhappy. She really didn't know what was wrong with that man. How did he end up like that? Could it be that he was poisoned? Or was there something wrong with him? Jing Yu turned around and entered the house. Looking at the books on the bookshelf, she wondered if there were any books that had records of this. With this thought, Jing Yu began to read seriously. Just as she was engrossed in her search, a cold voice sounded from behind her. What are you looking for? Aya. The sudden voice startled Jing Yu so much that she hurriedly turned around. Her eyes widened as she saw Xiao Chun standing in front of her, dressed in luxurious clothes. She didn't expect Xiao Chun to be so handsome in such luxurious clothes. Xiao Chun raised his eyebrows slightly as he looked at Jing Yu, his eyes full of questions. You, why did you come back so quickly? Jing Yu said as she looked away. Nothing happened. So I came back. Xiao Chun looked at Jing Yu's wrapped arm and said with a frown, How does your wound feel? Jing Yu looked at Xiao Chun with hidden bitterness and said, I can't feel my entire arm. What? Xiao Chun frowned slightly, as if he didn't understand. He had purged all the poison from Jing Yu's body, so why couldn't she feel her entire arm? You're wrapped up so tightly that you'll suffocate to death. What else can you feel? Jing Yu rolled her eyes at Xiao Chun and said, Let go of me. If you don't know how to bandage, get someone else to do it. Jing Yu finally relaxed her entire arm as she wished. Looking at the shallow cut on her arm, she felt a burst of fear. It was just a small cut, but it almost took her life. What a tyrannical poison. I remember that I was poisoned. How did you get the antidote to detoxify me? Jing Yu asked Xiao Chun as she looked at her bandaged wound. It's just a little poison. Do you think it can stop me? Xiao Chun glanced at Jing Yu from the corner of his eyes. His narrowed eyes made the corner of Jing Yu's mouth twitch. So, the deadly poison that was terrifying to her was just a little poison in Xiao Chun's eyes. As expected of the 9th emperors. How domineering. There's more. Xiao Chun coldly narrowed his eyes at Jing Yu and said, Why did you shake off Xing'er that day? What happened to your injury? This. Jing Yu nervously straightened her body after being questioned by Xiao Chun. If she said that she went to see a man, she reckoned that Xiao Chun would strangle her to death in the next second. She was blatantly trying to climb the wall. Jing Yu was even more horrified when she thought of that scene. She rolled her eyes and laughed. It's nothing. Speaking of which, why did you suddenly go to the palace today? What's the matter with the imperial consort fainting? Jingyu very decisively changed the topic. The imperial consort is pregnant. As expected, Xiao Chun was led to change the topic by Jingyu. However, the words that came out of Xiao Qin's mouth made Jingyu's eyes widen in shock. She looked at Xiao Qin strangely. She didn't expect Fu Ruoqing to be pregnant. Xiao Chun must be feeling terrible. After all, she was the one who was betrothed to him before she was born. And now she's having a child with his brother? Damn, what a cliché. Chapter 110. That. Xiao Chun, don't be too sad. Jingyu hesitated for a moment before saying, it's a good thing that the imperial consort is pregnant. You'll have another nephew. Jingyu, what nonsense are you talking about? Xiao Chen's expression gradually turned cold after hearing Jingyu's words. He looked at Jingyu with an extremely strange gaze. Ahaha, you don't have to be embarrassed. If you're sad, this lady will let you lean on my shoulder. Jingyu patted her shoulder in an imposing manner and looked at Xiao Chun with the expression of a good brother. She aborted the child. Xiao Chun silently retracted his gaze from Jingyu and decided to ignore Jingyu's completely disjointed thoughts. He spoke faintly and instantly put an end to all the messy thoughts in Jingyu's head. What? She aborted the child? Jingyu's eyes widened in shock. She blinked at Xiao Chun and said, she didn't want to give birth to this child? She actually aborted the emperor's child. TSK. How impressive. This is also the reason why I entered the palace. Xiao Chun closed his eyes and spat out those cold words. Jingyu felt that Xiao Chun still had something to say. However, seeing that Xiao Chun didn't seem to want to continue speaking, Jingyu naturally wouldn't open her mouth to speak. It will be the Cold Food Festival in 10 days. The eldest princess will come to the palace. You should be prepared. Xiao Chun stood up as he spoke. He glanced at Jingyu and said, recuperate well. You don't have to go to the academy to study these few days. I have a lot of things to do and won't be in the palace often. Oh, Jingyu blinked and looked at Xiao Chun. If you have any problems, just look for Xing'er. If you dare to dump him again, this king will definitely get to the bottom of what happened today. Xiao Chun narrowed his eyes dangerously as he looked at Jingyu with a heavy warning. Ahaha, no way, no way. Jingyu quickly waved her hands and respectfully sent Xiao Chun out. Her heart was filled with regret. Tell me, why is she so curious? Not only did he almost lose his life, he even made Xiao Chun suspicious. She was currently living under someone else's roof. Jingyu silently climbed onto the soft bed and sighed. She told herself over and over again that if she ever met that monstrous man again, she would definitely chop him into minced meat, to vent the hatred in his heart. The days when she didn't go to school were very carefree. Every day, other than eating, she slept. Jingyu felt that she had probably gained 5 kilograms in these few days. However, this was only Jingyu's feeling. On this day, the sun was shining brightly. Jingyu directed Xing'er to bring a deck chair to the courtyard. She comfortably lay down in the courtyard and basked in the sun. She also had Yin Xiao bring a lot of refreshments and food to the side of the table. She began to enjoy this afternoon to her heart's content. Imperial concubine, don't eat anymore. Yin Xiao looked at Jingyu's non-stop small mouth and instantly frowned as she said, other families' young misses don't dare to eat in order to maintain their figure. Imperial concubine, you are eating so fiercely. What if people make fun of you during the Cold Food Festival? Don't worry, this lady doesn't care. Jingyu said with a smile as she bit into the pastry in her hand. This ancient food was really too delicious. Imperial concubine. Yin Xiao looked at Jingyu with hidden bitterness as she called out. Speaking of which, what is the Cold Food Festival? Why do you all place so much importance on it? Jingyu held the tea and pastries to eat as she blinked and asked Yin Xiao. Chapter 111. Jingyu blinked and asked Yin Xiao as she ate the tea and pastries. Imperial consort, you don't know? Yin Xiao blinked and said, Cold Food Festival is a major festival in Tokyo. Every time it's Cold Food Festival, there will be a ceremony in the Imperial Palace. Every family will go to the cemetery to pay respects to their deceased relatives. There will also be a polo tournament held in the Imperial Horse Track outside the city. Isn't this the Qingming Festival? Jingyu was slightly stunned and her eyes widened. She had left the mountain for so long that she almost forgot to count the days. It seemed that it was already the Qingming Festival. Wasn't it called the Cold Food Festival in ancient times? She learned something new. What's the Qingming Festival? Yin Xiao was slightly stunned and blinked at Jingyu in confusion. No, I'm just speaking nonsense. Jingyu waved her hands and said with a smile, Imperial Consort, during the Cold Food Festival, many important people will go to watch the polo tournament. Imperial Consort can't eat anymore. If you get laughed at, you will lose the face of the Wangfu. Yin Xiao looked at Jingyu and said seriously. Jingyu's face instantly darkened. It's the Wangfu's Wangfu again. They can't even let people eat properly. Look, this is the sorrow of having a big family and a big business. But they have a lot of money. All right, she will endure it. Jingyu endured the pain and put down the half-eaten pastry. Seeing Yin Xiao happily take it away, her heart ached. Jingyu watched Yin Xiao leave and immediately saw Xing Er slowly walking over. She blinked slightly. Didn't this fellow not enter the court without being summoned? Why did he walk over by himself? Jingyu saw Xing Er standing in front of her. Imperial Consort, Miss Shangguan and Miss Ning request an audience. Xing Er had a poker face and said with his eyes lowered, Aya, they're here. Quickly invite them in. Jingyu's eyes instantly lit up. She was already tired of staying in the Wangfu all day. Shangguan Linglan and Ning Xiangyuan's arrival made Jingyu, who had just been deprived of food, regain her vitality. Jingyu. When Shangguan Linglan saw Jingyu, he instantly rushed over. Seeing Jingyu's arm wrapped in a white cloth, his eyes were filled with worry. Why are you so useless? How could you be attacked in broad daylight? Why don't you bring a bodyguard with you? The moment Shangguan Linglan opened his mouth, it was a series of reproachful words. His eyes were filled with worry, but he didn't know how to comfort her. However, these words that were clearly reproachful made Jingyu's heart feel slightly warm. She revealed a bright smile and said, Yes, Miss Shangguan. The next time I go out, I will definitely bring 1,000 elite soldiers to escort me. Pfft. Yeah. Ning Xiangyuan looked at Jingyu reproachfully and said, You're already injured. Why are you still so talkative? How is 1,000 enough? I'll give you 10,000. Shangguan Linglan waved his hand and said, If you bring 10,000 elite soldiers out on the streets, the two of us will probably see you on the guillotine tomorrow. Shangguan Linglan looked at Jingyu seriously and said. Jingyu and Ning Xiangyuan looked at Shangguan Linglan with their mouths agape. Lan, you can't wait to send me on my way? Jingyu looked at Shangguan Linglan with teary eyes, looking like an abandoned wife. All right, don't be so talkative. Shangguan Linglan rubbed his arms and raised his hand to pinch Jingyu's cheek and said, I haven't seen you for a few days. Why do I feel like you've gained weight? Really? I've become plump. Jingyu rubbed her face and said. Chapter 112. Really? I'm plump now. Jingyu said as she rubbed her face. Dia is so shameless. Ning Xiangyuan blushed slightly as she glared at Jingyu. Shangguan Linglan also began to tease her. Instantly, the courtyard was filled with laughter. Shangguan Linglan wanted to see Jingyu's 2 gray wolves, and Jingyu naturally agreed. Who would have thought that these 2 big guys would be so popular? However, Ning Xiangyuan was still afraid of these 2 big guys, so she could only wait for Jingyu to return. Jingyu naturally wouldn't make things difficult for Ning Xiangyuan. She happily brought Shangguan Linglan to the side courtyard. Shangguan Linglan touched Yin Jin's body and said, Why do I feel like your gray wolf has gotten fatter too? Heavens! They really did get fatter. Jingyu touched Yin Jin's legs in horror. The originally strong muscles were already starting to shrink. If this continued, these 2 ferocious beasts would really become pets. No. She definitely couldn't let such a terrifying thing happen. Jingyu immediately called Xing Er in and told him to tell Xiao Chun to see if it was possible to leave the city and release these 2 fellows back on the mountain. Keeping them in captivity in the prince's estate wasn't a good idea. Xing Er obeyed and left. Jing Yu and Shangguan Linglan played with Yin Jian and Yin Feng. Ning Xiangyuan sat in place and played with the fallen leaf in her hand. Just as she was wondering why Jing Yu and the others hadn't returned yet, she heard Yin Xiao's greeting from the courtyard entrance. This servant pays her respects to the 9th emperors. The 9th emperors? Ning Xiangyuan immediately stood up and turned to look. Xiao Chun, dressed in an ink-black robe, slowly walked into the courtyard. Xing Yi and Xing Er followed behind him. The handsome man practically stole everyone's attention at first glance. Greetings to the 9th emperors. Ning Xiangyuan hurriedly looked down at her own clothes and quickly walked up to greet him. Xiao Chun replied faintly. He didn't even look at Ning Xiangyuan and turned to walk to the side courtyard. The 9th emperors. Ning Xiangyuan watched the 9th emperors leave, and her heart skipped a beat. She raised her voice and called out to Xiao Chun. She saw that Xiao Chun really stopped and turned to look at her. Those deep eyes were staring straight at her. She couldn't help but wish that this man only had eyes for her. I am Ye's good friend. My name is Ning Xiangyuan. Ning Xiangyuan looked nervously at Xiao Chun and said with a red face. Xiao Chun lowered his gaze and replied faintly. He was about to walk away again. Has Ye mentioned me before? Ning Xiangyuan asked carefully as she looked at Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun frowned when he heard this. He turned around and stared at Ning Xiangyuan. He said coldly, Is it that important? No, I didn't mean it that way. Ning Xiangyuan looked at Xiao Chun's frown and thought that Xiao Chun was angry. She instantly became nervous. She wanted to explain, but she didn't know what she had said wrong. She put on a pitiful look. Xiao Chun, what are you doing? Jing Yu and Shangguan Linglan walked out and saw the two of them. Jing Yu immediately walked over. She was angry when she saw that Ning Xiangyuan looked like she was being bullied. This is my friend. You said that you could bring people into the residence. Don't scare her. Jing Yu glared at Xiao Chun unhappily. Chapter 113. This is my friend. Last time, you said you could bring people into the residence. Don't scare her. Jing Yu glared at Xiao Chun with dissatisfaction. Xiao Chun silently glanced at Jing Yu, then glanced at Ning Xiangyuan, who was beside Jing Yu. He helplessly pursed his lips and said, I didn't mean it. When Xiao Chun finished speaking, Ning Xiangyuan's eyes widened in disbelief. Was the 9th emperor's apologizing to her just now? And the 9th emperor's actually called himself me? Such a huge impact caused Ning Xiangyuan to be stunned for a long time, unable to regain her senses. I only came to tell you that I will make arrangements for Grey Wolf. As for the details, come to my study later. I won't disturb you. Xiao Chun gently raised his hand and rubbed Jing Yu's head. That gentle action completely petrified Shangguan Linglan and Ning Xiangyuan. Got it. Jing Yu disdainfully avoided Xiao Chun's hand. Every time Xiao Chun treated her like this, she would feel like a small animal. The corner of Xiao Chun's mouth twitched, then he turned and left. When Xiao Chun's figure disappeared, Ning Xiangyuan and Shangguan Linglan were still staring blankly at the empty courtyard door. Jing Yu rolled her eyes and patted their shoulders. Come back to your senses. Jing Yu, tell us honestly, how did you capture the 9th emperor's heart? Shangguan Linglan excitedly hugged Jing Yu's shoulders and asked. The 9th emperor's is so gentle. Ning Xiangyuan's cheeks blushed slightly. You two love-struck fools. Jing Yu pinched their cheeks and said with a smile, Do you want to see Xiao Chun every day? Come. Take a look, 100 taels. Give me the money. I'll make Xiao Chun sit there every day for you to see. A woman's heart is the most vicious. Shangguan Linglan's face darkened as he glared at Jing Yu. I don't have that much money. Can you make it cheaper? Ning Xiangyuan looked troubled. Pfft. Ha, Yuan. You really took it seriously. Jing Yu and Shangguan Linglan burst into laughter. Both of them made fun of Ning Xiangyuan, and the courtyard was filled with jubilation. The three of them talked about the cold food festival for a while, more before leaving. Jing Yu, rest well? We'll meet again during the cold food festival, Shangguan Linglan said as he patted Jing Yu's shoulder. Yeah, we'll be leaving first. Do you want to say goodbye to the 9th emperors? Ning Xiangyuan slightly tightened her grip on the handkerchief in her hand and frowned slightly as she looked at Jingyu and asked, "No need. He's always appearing and disappearing like a ghost. Who knows where he went?" Jingyu rolled her eyes and said, "I'll let Xing'er send you guys out of the residence." Yeah. You're so lucky to be able to marry such a handsome and gentle man like the Ninth Emperor's." Ning Xiangyuan's eyes were filled with envy. "Forget it." Jingyu waved her hand and said, "Have you forgotten how the previous imperial concubines died? They all died the day before the wedding. Xiao Chun and I haven't gotten married yet. Who knows if we'll really end up like the previous imperial concubines on that day." Jingyu's hair stood on end as she said this. She was already wondering if she should quickly run away before the wedding. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Shangguan Linglan and Ning Xiangyuan's expressions both changed. They clearly thought of this as well. They were in the imperial city and had personally seen the corpses being carried out. This wasn't a rumor, but it was more or less exaggerated by those women. Chapter 114. Jingyu, I have asked my elder brother about this matter. He said that there was an imperial concubine who died on their wedding night, but it wasn't a strange death. Instead, it was an assassination attempt. Furthermore, there were 4 people who were assassinated. I don't know why this rumor started to spread. Shangguan Linglan looked at Jingyu with a serious expression. What about the others? How did they die? Jingyu was slightly stunned. This was the first time she had heard of such a thing. The other women all committed suicide. Shangguan Linglan sighed slightly and said, "Those young ladies were forced by their parents to marry the Ninth Emperors. They were probably frightened by the rumors, so they committed suicide." As time passed, the rumors became more and more bizarre. People started to say that the Ninth Emperor's was the incarnation of a demon. So that's how it is. Jingyu suddenly understood and widened her eyes. After that, no other women were willing to marry the Ninth Emperor's. There were also rumors that people who saw the Ninth Emperor's face were possessed, or that people who touched the Ninth Emperor's died mysteriously. In short, after that, the Ninth Emperor's became extremely mysterious and revered. Shangguan Linglan said with pursed lips, "That's right. In the past, we didn't even dare to look at the Ninth Emperor's. If it weren't for you, Jingyu, we wouldn't have known that this was the true appearance of the Ninth Emperor's," Ning Xiangyuan said with a slight smile as she looked at Jingyu. "These rumors are still somewhat controlled in the imperial city. Because the imperial family is here, many people don't dare to talk about it. Perhaps it's because the Ninth Emperor's influence is too great. However, among the commoners, there is still a fear of the Ninth Emperor's. When the rumors spread to the outside world, I don't know how ugly these rumors were," Shangguan Linglan said. "Xiao Chun. His influence is too great?" Jingyu's mouth slightly stiffened. She silently thought that in this prince's palace, there were only a few servants. The only powerful ones were Xing-Yi and Xing-Er. Where was their influence? "I'm not sure either. My father told me not to provoke anyone but the Ninth Emperor's. I don't know the specifics." Shangguan Linglan slightly spread his hands and said, "However, seeing how well the Ninth Emperor's treats you, I'm relieved. If the Ninth Emperor's wants to protect you, even if you don't have any status or family background, no one will dare to look down on you." "Huh? What a joke. I need him to protect me." "Haha, I forgot about that." Shangguan Linglan raised his head and laughed. As the 3 of them were talking, Xingyi suddenly appeared in front of the 3 of them. He bowed slightly and said, "Imperial concubine, Master invites you to the study. He has something to discuss." Jingyu slightly frowned and looked at Xingyi before turning to bid farewell to Shangguan Linglan and Ning Xiangyuan. She had Xing'er send the 2 of them out of the palace. Jingyu then turned and walked towards Xiao Chen's study. However, just as she approached the study, Jingyu's sharp ears immediately heard the faint sounds of discussion coming from inside. Jingyu instantly stopped in her tracks. She tilted her head slightly and asked Xingyi curiously, "Who's inside?" "The Prime Minister's first master, Jingzhan, is in the study." Xingyi was slightly stunned and pursed his lips. "What?" Jingyu suddenly took a step back. She didn't know what was going on as she looked at the tightly shut door. She suddenly became timid and frowned deeply. Without thinking, She turned and left. Xingyi hurriedly raised his voice to stop Jingyu and said, "Imperial concubine, don't you want to know what they're talking about?" "No." Jingyu bit her lips. She didn't want to know. Chapter 115. I don't want to know. Jingyu bit her lip. She didn't want to know. Imperial Consort, come with me. There's a compartment here. You can see the people inside, but they can't see you. Xingyi turned to look at Jingyu. He turned and climbed in through the window. Jingyu stayed where she was and looked at the open window. Her heart was conflicted. In the end, Jingyu let out a long sigh and still entered the room. She carefully stuck to the screen and looked through the peephole. She saw the scene in the study. The first thing she saw was Xiao Qin's unchanging face. He looked so indifferent. She didn't know what could make his expression change so much. Jingyu pursed her lips and turned her eyes to the other side. A slightly old and resolute face came into view. Jingyu had seen him before. It was the first master of the Prime Minister's residence, Jingzhan. At this moment, his brows were deeply furrowed, as if he was worried about something difficult to solve. Jingyu didn't know if it was because of her heart, but when she saw Jingzhan on the street that day, Jingyu only felt that this man was somewhat pitiful. However, seeing him today and seeing him in the wheelchair, she suddenly felt her heart ache. Although this feeling of heartache only flashed for a moment, it still made Jingyu's eyes light up. Actually, she was still looking forward to it. She was looking forward to having a family. Jingyu slightly lowered her eyes and tightly pursed her lips. All kinds of emotions and thoughts rolled through her eyes. Ninth Emperors, what do you think of what I said? Jingzhan opened his mouth to speak and looked at Xiao Chun. Has First Master Jing truly finished his preparations? Xiao Chun looked at Jingzhan with narrowed eyes. Have you decided to take back the position of the head of household?
Yes.
Jingzhan's face was resolute. Looking at his bright and expressive black eyes, one could tell that this person back then must have been a man that no one could ignore. Even though he looked old, it wasn't hard to see that he had been handsome back then. This king doesn't understand. You've stayed out of all the disputes for more than 10 years. Why did you decide to take back the position of patriarch at this moment? Xiao Chen's mouth twitched slightly, and his eyes were full of scrutiny. How could you not know the Ninth Emperors? Jingzhan pursed his lips into a smile. Jingyu, she has returned. Jingzhan's words were slightly hoarse. When Jingyu, who was listening intently, suddenly heard her name, she trembled. She held her breath and quietly listened to the conversation between the two. I've been searching for her for 14 years, but I haven't been able to find any news about her. At one point, I thought that she had already died. Jingzhan sighed softly and said, but there's always been a stubborn thought in his heart that he's unwilling to admit. That's why he's always been restraining the Prime Minister's estate. Is this the reason why you moved out of the Prime Minister's residence, but didn't move out of the Imperial City? Xiao Chen's heart stirred slightly as he asked with a frown. Yes, I had a glimmer of hope that she would grow up and come back to find out about her past. But now that she's returned, she doesn't recognize me as her father. Jingzhan's words were filled with pain. He gritted his teeth and said, it's fine. As long as I know that she's alive and well, even if I can't see her, I'll be satisfied. Ninth Emperors, today I've come to ask you for help. It's not for myself, it's for Jingyu. Jingzhan turned his head and looked steadily at Xiao Chun. I want to take back the position of patriarch and control the Prime Minister's estate. In the future, the Prime Minister's estate will be Jingyu's backer. No matter what she does, I will pave the way for her. She doesn't recognize you as her father. Why do you have to do this for her? Xiao Chun said indifferently as he lowered his eyes. Chapter 116. Even if she doesn't acknowledge me, I only have this one daughter in this lifetime. Consider it as atonement for the mistakes I have committed. Jingzhan smiled bitterly. I gave birth to a child but didn't raise her, leaving her to fend for herself outside for 14 years. This is a heinous crime. Let me use the rest of my life to ensure her safety. Jingyu bit her lips tightly, not allowing herself to make the slightest sound. Jingzhan's words were still in her ears, but her silent heart felt waves of sour pain. She thought that she could really remain unmoved and unmoved. But when she heard these words, her eyes couldn't help but turn red. Imperial concubine. Xingyi looked at Jing Yu's back view with her head lowered, slightly pursing his lips as he called out, "Let's go." Jing Yu slowly turned around. Her lowered head prevented others from seeing the expression on Jing Yu's face. Xingyi was slightly stunned as he watched Jing Yu leave through the window. He didn't know what kind of mentality he had after listening to everything. Jing Yu walked back to her own courtyard and laid on the bed with her head raised. She stared at the bed frame with her pitch-black eyes without moving at all. All kinds of thoughts were surging in her heart. Jing Yu didn't know what she was feeling as Jing Zhan's words echoed in her ears. Xiao Chen walked in and saw Jing Yu in such a state. He waved his hand to dismiss the worried Yin Xiao and walked forward to sit beside Jing Yu. He lowered his head to look at Jing Yu's open eyes and raised his hand to lightly touch Jing Yu's cheek. He left? Jing Yu closed her eyes and opened them to look at Xiao Chen as she asked. He left. Xiao Chen nodded and took out a bottle of ointment. I heard that you were injured, so I sent some ointment. Jing Yu sat up and stared at the ointment in Xiao Chen's hand. She hesitated for a moment before reaching out to take it. Feeling the warmth of the ointment, she suddenly felt as if she was holding a pair of warm hands that wrapped around her. That kind of warmth was something she had never experienced before. She told herself time and time again that she couldn't think about it, time and time again that she had to reject it. She would rather hope that her father had abandoned her, that he really didn't want her, and not out of helplessness and pity. The current situation caused Jing Yu to fall into a dilemma. Xiao Chen, will you help him? Jing Yu asked as she tightly held the bottle in her hand. Yes. Xiao Chen slowly nodded. If the Prime Minister's residence can be used by me, Xiao Jingran will have one less helper. Why not? Jing Yu pursed her lips. She didn't know about the matters of the imperial family, but she knew that Xiao Chen and Xiao Jingran were rivals. Even if I don't help him, he can still take back the position of the head of the household. Xiao Chen narrowed his eyes and said, Jing Zhan's ability can't be underestimated, not to mention that there is also Jing Lang, who is in charge of the 3 armies. However, with my help, he can take back the position of the patriarch as quickly as possible without any repercussions. What do you mean? Jing Yu frowned slightly. Jing Zhan has been silent for 14 years, and his legs have a chronic illness. There will definitely be elders in the household who won't accept it. Second Master will also use this as an excuse to suppress him. If Jing Zhan wants to stabilize his position, how can he do it without 3 to 5 years? If this king comes out to support him, who would dare to say anything? Xiao Chen smiled arrogantly and disdainfully. How arrogant? Jing Yu looked speechlessly at Xiao Chen. She was already familiar with his personality. She frowned slightly and said, I heard that Jing Zhan's legs used to be fine. How did he suddenly become disabled? Chapter 117. Jing Yu looked at Xiao Chen speechlessly. She was already familiar with his temperament. She frowned slightly and said, I heard that Jing Zhan's legs used to be fine. How did he suddenly become disabled? You don't know? Xiao Chen frowned slightly as he looked at Jing Yu. What? Jing Yu shook her head to show that she didn't know. Back then, after Jing Zhan escaped into the Roman forest with his wife and child, he was captured by his family. Later, Jing Zhan wanted to escape the imperial city countless times to find his wife and child. His father was the current prime minister, Jing Tingyi. In a fit of anger, he crippled Jing Zhan's legs. It was also after that Jing Zhan left the prime minister's manor. What? Jing Yu's entire body trembled. Her eyes widened as she looked at Xiao Chen with disbelief. The outside world said that Jing Zhan accidentally injured his legs in the Roman forest. In fact, that's not the case. It's precisely because of this that Jing Tingyi calmed down and realized his mistake. That's why he has always been very protective of Jing Zhan. Perhaps it's to make up for his mistakes. Xiao Chen frowned. However, Jing Zhan didn't benefit from it. After leaving the prime minister's manor, he disappeared for half a month. The time for treatment of his crippled legs has already passed. There's no way to treat them anymore, so he ended up with a lifelong disability. Xiao Chen's voice was calm. Jing Yu's heart was not calm at all. So that's how Jing Zhan came back. He wanted to look for me, but because of that, my father broke his legs. How cruel. Why? Why can't the Jing family tolerate us? Jing Yu's voice was trembling as she looked up at Xiao Chun. I don't know the specifics. Xiao Chun looked at Jing Yu's expression and his heart shook slightly. He nodded and said, it seems that the Jing family's grandmother said something. She can't tolerate your mother. Even after you were born, she can't tolerate you. That's why she expelled you. Just because she said it, she forced a family to break up and die? Jing Yu sneered. An indescribable anger slowly rose in her body. This is the family. Xiao Chun raised his hand and put it around Jing Yu's waist. He raised his hand and gently stroked her hair. Jing Yu closed her eyes slightly and leaned on Xiao Chen's shoulder. Jing Yu didn't say anything for a few days. No one knew what she was doing. Jing Yu, in the blink of an eye. Jing Jing. Xiao Chen lay on the bed and narrowed his eyes. He watched as Jing Yu bounced up and down. She was choosing what to wear today. She didn't look as frustrated as she did a few days ago. She was humming a little song and seemed to be in a good mood. Clang 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 clang. Or this one. Xiao Chun was indifferent. I'll take this one, Jing Yu said as she looked at the azure tunic. No, the skirt is too long. If I step on it, it will break. Jing Yu decisively tossed the clothes aside and began to choose again. In the end, she set her eyes on a dark red high-collared riding suit with a black border. The totem was outlined by golden threads and looked very noble. I'll take this one. Jing Yu quickly put it on. She looked at herself in the bronze mirror and nodded with satisfaction. She turned to look at Xiao Chun, who was still lying on the bed expressionlessly, and said, What are you looking at? Get up. Chapter 118. What are you looking at? It's time to get up. Jing Yu, if you don't want to see the Jing father and son, you can stay in the palace. You don't have to force yourself. Xiao Chen slowly stood up and put on his robes. Who said I don't want to see them? Jing Yu rolled her eyes and looked at Xiao Chen with disdain. She turned and walked out of the room. She called for Yin Xiao to help her wash up. When she heard Yin Xiao say that there would be a polo match today, Jing Yu had Yin Xiao comb her hair neatly. When Jing Yu finished washing up, Xiao Chen also finished tidying up. He looked at Jing Yu, who looked different today. He frowned slightly and said, There's still a ceremony in the palace. Let Xing take you to the horse track first. I'll be there soon. Okay. Jing Yu replied cheerfully. After eating breakfast with Xiao Chun, they parted ways in front of the palace. Jing Yu lay in the carriage and thought for a moment. She decided to go find Shangguan Linglan and Ning Shangyuan first. She had Xing turn around. Let's go to the general's residence first. Jing Yu walked towards the general's residence. When Jing Yu stood in front of the gate, she looked at the solemn gate. Her eyes were filled with amazement. Look at the 3 words, general's residence, written in flamboyant calligraphy. Jing Yu clicked her tongue and sighed. Just by looking at the gate, she could feel the majestic aura. Who are you? Just as Jing Yu was looking at the gate, a figure suddenly came from the side. Jing Yu was startled. She turned her head and saw a tall and sturdy man striding over. He was wearing soft armor. Jing Yu was stunned. She looked at the man in front of her. He had an extraordinary bearing. He was wearing military armor. Looking at the sword at his waist, he should have a high status. If Jing Yu's analysis was correct, this person should be Shangguan Linglan's older brother. I'm here too. Jing Yu smiled and was about to speak. Jing Yu. Before Jing Yu could speak, she was interrupted by a surprised voice. Jing Yu turned her head and saw Shangguan Linglan running over to Jing Yu. Without saying a word, he pulled Jing Yu into the carriage. Quick. Let's go. Shangguan Linglan pushed Jing Yu into the carriage. Jing Yu was shocked by Shangguan Linglan's actions. She frowned and asked, What's wrong? Third brother, it's best if you don't go in. Father is teaching fifth brother a lesson. He's teaching big brother, second brother, and fourth brother a lesson as well. Shangguan Linglan stared at the imposing man and said, "Luckily I ran fast. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be able to get out of bed today." What? Fifth brother made the old master angry again? The man's face was filled with fear. Under Jing Yu's shocked gaze, he turned around and ran away without looking back. His running speed made Jing Yu's jaw drop. Was General Shangguan's reputation really that great? He didn't even see him, and he ran away. "Let's go." Shangguan Linglan looked fearfully at the door of the general's residence and hurriedly urged, "Your family is like this every day?" Jing Yu was silent for a moment. She looked at the frightened Shangguan Linglan and asked, "Don't mention it." Shangguan Linglan said with a mournful face, "How do you think I got my martial arts? It was all forced out." Pfft. Cough, cough, cough. Jing Yu almost laughed out loud. She coughed a few times and asked, "How many brothers do you have in your family?" Chapter 119. How many older brothers do you have in your family? 6. Shangguan Linglan blinked his eyes and said, "I'm the youngest in my family and the seventh." "You really can give birth." Jing Yu's mouth twitched as she muttered to herself. After Jing Yu picked up Shangguan Linglan, she went to the Ning residence to pick up Ning Shangwen as well. The three of them rode in the same carriage and headed out of the city. The Imperial Horse Ranch was very spacious outside of the city. It was very grand. "It's really big." Jing Yu and Shangguan Linglan stood outside the horse ranch, their eyes filled with amazement. "We're at the horse ranch again." Shangguan Linglan's face was filled with excitement, as if she was eager to give it a try. Just as Jing Yu and the others were about to go over, they suddenly saw a few horses slowly approaching from the distance. As the horses slowly approached, they raised a cloud of dust as they galloped past. Cough, cough, cough. Jing Yu frowned and waved her hand to block the dust. She couldn't help but frown. What was the meaning of this? Princess Liang's horsemanship is really good. Yen is ashamed of her inferiority. As Jing Yu was rehearsing, she saw the people on the horses not far away. It turned out to be Princess Liang and Princess Xiling, as well as Jing Yin and the other young misses of the officials' families. She looked at Princess Liang and exclaimed in amazement, "Of course, this princess knew how to ride a horse when I was 10. Princess Liang raised her chin and said, "Why do I remember that when Princess Liang was 10 years old, you cried a few times because you rode a horse?" Xiling suddenly felt uncomfortable. She glanced at Liang and laughed mockingly. "You." Princess Liang's face turned slightly red. How could she not be angry after being exposed by Xiling? Just as she was about to say something, Jing Yin suddenly shouted, "Isn't this Jing Yu and the young miss of the Shangguan family?" As soon as Jing Yin finished speaking, everyone's gaze was immediately attracted. Princess Liang finally noticed Jing Yu and Shangguan Linglan standing not far away. She immediately widened her eyes and anger slowly appeared in her eyes. She said coldly, "So it's you too." Ning Shangyuan was puzzled. She frowned and looked at Jing Yu and Shangguan Linglan and asked, "You two know Princess Liang?" Jing Yu looked like she was about to cry. How the fuck are they just acquaintances? They're practically mortal enemies. "Princess Liang, Princess Xiling, long time no see." Jing Yu raised her head and smiled at the two. "Humph." Princess Liang snorted coldly. She narrowed her eyes at Jing Yu and Shangguan Linglan and said coldly, "It's obvious that you're unruly. This is the Imperial Horse Ranch. Aren't you going to greet me when you see me?" Jing Yu and Shangguan Linglan looked at each other and coldness flashed in their eyes. Jing Yu smiled and coughed. She smiled and gave Princess Liang an extremely strange greeting. She dragged out her voice and said, "Greetings, Princess Liang, Princess Xiling." "You." Princess Liang's face darkened. Seeing Jing Yu's greeting, she felt like she was being played. "Princess Liang, I'm just a wild girl from another place. If I've done anything rude, please be magnanimous and don't take offense." Jing Yu stood up before Princess Liang said that she was excused. She actually admitted that she was rude without a care. It was truly hateful and infuriating. "Of course, I won't take offense." Princess Liang gritted her teeth and said. She slightly tightened her grip on the reins, as if she suddenly thought of something. Chapter 120. She sneered at Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan and said, I heard that the two of you are pretty good at horsemanship. I would like to ask for some advice. I'm sure the two of you will do me the honor, right? What? When did we say that we are good at horsemanship? Jingyu frowned slightly. What? Could it be that I'm not important enough to compete with you? Princess Leong narrowed her eyes at Jingyu, her eyes full of provocation and warning. Fuck. It's this again. This Princess Leong was exactly the same as her sister, Imperial Consort Fu. She was clearly using her status to suppress others, but she still looked like she was blaming her. This was simply intolerable. What are you saying, Princess Leong? I'm just afraid that Princess Leong will lose too miserably and blame us. Jingyu sneered and spat out such arrogant words, causing Princess Xiling and Jing Yin to widen their eyes. What a clever mouth. Before Princess Leong could speak, a cold snort came from behind Jingyu. Everyone turned around and saw a well-dressed woman walking over with the support of others. The cold expression she had on her face as she looked at Jingyu was Imperial Consort Fu Ruoqing, who had just arrived. Greetings, Imperial Consort. Princess Leong and the others hurriedly dismounted and bowed. This consort heard everything just now. Fu Ruoqing stood in front of everyone with a faint smile on her face. Miss Jingyu wants to have a horse race with Leong? I didn't want to compete with her. She forced me to do so. Jingyu shrugged nonchalantly. She turned her eyes to look at Fu Ruoqing. Didn't she just abort the child? Why didn't she look like she had a miscarriage? Since it's a competition, there should naturally be a witness. Fu Ruoqing looked at Jingyu with a trace of disgust. She didn't care about Jingyu's words at all and said, I'm just in the mood. Why don't I be your witness? Imperial concubine, this isn't appropriate. Jingyu frowned and said, everyone knows that Princess Leong is your younger sister. If you help Princess Leong, wouldn't it be unfair? How could this consort do such a thing? Fu Ruoqing frowned as she glared at Jingyu. I'm not you. How would I know if you know how to do it? Jingyu shrugged nonchalantly, making Fu Ruoqing angry. This consort feels that Jingyu is right. Just as Fu Ruoqing was about to defend herself, another voice was heard. Everyone looked up and saw that the Empress had also arrived. Her phoenix coronet and phoenix robe could kill Fu Ruoqing in a matter of seconds, as expected of the Empress. Greetings, Your Majesty. Everyone curtsied. Jingyu secretly looked at Empress Fei Yaju. Fei Yaju's complexion was clearly much better than the last time she saw her. As expected, the women in the harem needed the emperor's nourishment. Jingyu secretly laughed in her heart. She glanced at Fu Ruoqing, who was gnashing her teeth, and her mood improved greatly. Why did Your Majesty come so quickly? Could it be that His Majesty also came? Fu Ruoqing slowly smiled as she looked at Fei Yaju. Younger sister, don't look. His Majesty is still in the middle of the ceremony. Because he understands that this consort's body isn't well, he had this consort come first. Fei Yaju said with a flaunting expression. She smiled at Fei Yaju and said, if this consort didn't come, how could I see such an interesting thing? You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.